We're in a series where we are talking about the divided monarchy of Israel in Kings and Chronicles, where we jump back and forth. For you who follow in your Bibles, we will be primarily in 1 Kings 12, and then we'll go to 2 Chronicles 10, do a little bouncing back and forth, because as we saw in the introduction, they supplement one another and many times actually reproduce one another. We are now at the point in Israel's history that's marked by this little star, okay? Solomon's kingdom has ended. Solomon has died, 930 BC, roughly. And last week we talked about Rehoboam and what a tragic figure he was. Rehoboam is this guy right here. He's the first king of what became the kingdom of Judah. Now remember, isn't that nice and antiseptic the way this gets done? Okay. What happens is Solomon dies, we go to crown Rehoboam, and everything blows up, which tells you that in Solomon's day, there must have been a lot of resentment, a lot of political unrest that was below the surface that you couldn't see. And it isn't always obvious when a major change is going to strike like lightning. 9/11 is an example of that, but so would be things like Pearl Harbor in 1941. So Rehoboam discovers now that his kingdom is being torn from him. He was a tragic figure. And just to give you a little bit of a review, you recall that he refused to address the problems that were being brought to him in a peaceful way at this big convention. And everybody was so resentful, they went berserk. And then pretty soon he almost gets stoned, and he has to escape to his chariot and run full tilt for Jerusalem in the fortress, where he starts figuring out, how am I going to get my kingdom back? And within 5 years, Rehoboam is invaded by Egypt, and he is his land is ransacked. His fortresses are destroyed. The people that defend him in his fortresses are slaughtered. And then the city is besieged, Jerusalem, and the only way he can escape from that is to let Egyptian officials come in and steal every single bit of his father's wealth. So all of the glorious wealth of Solomon's kingdom goes out within 5 years of Solomon's death. Isn't that tragic? And then we saw that as an illustration of that, there were all these solid gold shields in Solomon's palace that were on the wall. It was one of the things they were most proud of. And they took every last one of them. And what Rehoboam did, he didn't have any money now, he went ahead and he made some bronze substitutes, some cheap substitutes that he put up there. Nowhere near the glory, right? And now, instead of people paying taxes to Rehoboam, because they're all in rebellion, that all stopped. Now he's paying taxes to Egypt. And there's a message in that for us that I just wanted to close one more time. When you turn your back on the Lord, and you've been enjoying his blessings, but you go ahead and abandon him, and he abandons you, that will bring damage, not just on you, but on those who depend on you, those who are influenced by you. In Rehoboam's case, it was the entire nation or the entire tribe of Judah. They were slaughtered. A lot of tragedy, a lot of pain in the world comes because an influential person turns his back on the Lord. Second thing is, he will reduce you to servitude. The New Testament tells us that if you yield yourself instruments of unrighteousness, you become the slave of unrighteousness. It's been said that Satan will take you down deeper than you want to go, keep you there longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you ever wanted to pay. And that's the fruit of sin. And then, of course, lastly, like with those shields, the glory departs. The glory of God departs. And so we see the condition of all of us, the condition of men, is that we turn our backs on God so naturally. We are lost. We cause damage. We need healing. We are in servitude, and the glory is gone. And that is where redemption makes its appearance. That's why the redemption of the gospel is so vitally important. We have a sin bearer that will take on himself the sin, and then he brings healing for the damage. And many of you know that. You've had lives that you have seen God heal wounds that were great. He will eliminate your servitude and set you free. and he will eventually bring back the glory. There's the lesson in Rehoboam's tragic life. It's really a lesson from the negative. And a lot of these kings, as we go through them, will be teaching us lessons from the negative, I'm afraid. Now, we're going to go back to the story of the other side of this thing. Jeroboam right here is the first, they say, the king of the kingdom of Israel. Well, he was the leader of the opposition. Remember, he was a self-made man who came up from poverty. He lived he was a single mother, raised him. He lived in a farming town, and he grew up with the labor gangs that worked on Solomon's grand construction projects, like the temple and the palace of the cedars of Lebanon and his stables, and who knows all the other things that he did. So Jeroboam had a tremendous amount of influence. He also was popular, and he took the cause of labor against management. And we don't know exactly what he did, but I imagine typical things that union activists do, sit-ins and petitions and, strikes, work stoppages, sure, all that stuff. And he got under Solomon's skin to where Solomon decided to have him killed. And then he fled to Egypt. And so he spent a number of years in Egypt. And that's significant to the story today. Okay. I think that he was the most brilliant leader of all the kings in the northern kingdom. There's nobody that, to my view, is the kind of man that Jeroboam was. He's self-made. He's the only one who came up through the ranks through ability and charisma and was chosen by the people. He's the only king that wasn't raised in a prince's household under princely privilege, as he's the son of the king, or he's the only king who didn't become king by assassinating the guy before. That's really significant. He's a popular man. He is a great leader. He's a master strategist, as we'll see in just a little bit, and a great leader. And he had the most far-reaching effect of all the kings in Israel, the northern kingdom, because as you go through, we'll see this a little later, you go through all the stories of the northern kingdom, it always refers back to Jeroboam and how he steered the country in the wrong direction. He had a powerful leadership influence, but not for good. So he's going to become the king of the northern kingdom. And I want to show you how that happens and how some of the dynamics play out both this week and next week. So let's go back to where the kingdom actually falls apart. We're in 1 Kings 12 and verses 16 and 17. Glenn, would you be our reader
Certainly.
today?
When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, O David." So the Israelites went home. But as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them.
Now, it's a lot more chaotic than that, okay? This is a huge political assembly. They're going to crown the new king. And remember, Solomon's kingdom was great. It was the wealthiest in the world. It was world-renowned. So there would have been all the leaders of the 12 tribal governments. Think of them as states in the United States because it was a tribal governing system. So all of their leaders, all of their poobahs, all of the people who were somebody, certainly all the wealthiest people in the country would be there. Nobody's going to miss this celebration. People with an axe to grind would be there. Foreign dignitaries would be there. This is a big deal, okay? And so they really had an opportunity to have National Assembly, and it's in that National Assembly that they make the request for some relief from Jeroboam, or from Rehoboam's oppression. They were tired of the forced labor. Remember, he drafted your sons into his service to serve as slave labor. And in some cases, if they were Canaanites, he made them slaves for life to work on all these glorious projects for his glory. Now, they were seething with unhappiness, and they approached the king, the new king, and he tells them, "My little finger's bigger than my father's waist. You think you got it bad now. He chastised you with whips. I will chastise you with scorpions. Now get back to work." Really? What do you think the reaction would be among people who are already like a tinderbox ready to kick off? Well, it'd be pretty chaotic. And I think I mentioned last week the Democratic National Convention of 1968. Everybody's shouting and yelling and screaming, and there's violence outside the gates, and things are going wild. Well, Rehoboam almost gets stoned, and he's got to take his entourage and flee for Jerusalem. So now Jeroboam is back from Egypt. The people are listening to him. He's obviously got an influence. Now what happens? Well, they try to reconvene the National Assembly. Say, hey, we got everybody here. We better decide what to do. We are now in the position where we tried to stone our king. And what he's not going to like that, and he's going to come after us. He's, in fact, down in Jerusalem right now, and he's recruiting an army. He's already got 180,000 people ready. Okay? And we don't have anything. So they all got together, and they had this confab again. And verse 20 tells us that. Glenn?
Certainly. When all the Israelites heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent out and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. Only the tribe of Judah remained loyal to the house of David.
I think it's significant that it says all Israel. I mean, they aren't willing to say, we just want to secede and be left alone. They're saying, we want a new king. We want, and this is what happens all through the northern kingdom, all the dynasty changes. When they didn't like one king, they'd assassinate him and start a new family. And so that is exactly what they're talking about here. They're going to make Jeroboam the king over all Israel. So what does that mean? Well, that means there's going to be civil war until one king or the other wins the game. Remember David and Saul? David became king in Hebron, and he ruled for 7 years over the tribe of Judah and his friends, but he didn't gain control over Israel until he defeated the house of Saul, and that took almost 7 years. So this is what they're facing. Let's imagine that all the tribes are still there, and that includes Judah. Now, remember, the prophecy that Ahijah gave to Jeroboam was that God would reserve one tribe loyal to him. And I imagine that Judah, the tribe of David, would have objected to any nominee to be the king except someone from their tribe. Wouldn't you agree? Sure. Why? Well, besides pride, everybody wants their favorite son to be the king, right? Why would Judah say, we are not voting for any king except someone from Judah, the tribe of Judah? What's their basis for that? Line of David, exactly. But beside that, go back further.
One tribe had to come from one tribe.
Well, that's true. God's anointing. Interesting. Go back to Genesis 49, verse 10. In that scene, the old patriarch Jacob is now down in Egypt, and he takes his 11 sons and the 2 sons of Joseph, and he brings them into his deathbed, and he pronounces his blessing and his prophecies over them. And what does he say about Judah in Genesis 49:10?
The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs. And the obedience of the nations is, that's right, and the obedience of the nations is his.
What are they talking about? Until he comes to whom it belongs. I can't hear you.
Jesus.
I'm half deaf anyway, so who is it, Jesus?
Yes.
Yeah, Messiah.
Messiah.
The hope of the Israelite people was that God would send a redeemer since Genesis. And certainly that promise has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger as it's repeated. And they're looking for the king that will come not only from the tribe of Judah, but from the line of David. Now, it didn't have to be Rehoboam. We could pick a better candidate than that. But Judah would have gone ahead and said, if you're going to pick somebody else, I am out of here. And so the prophecy was fulfilled. One tribe will remain loyal, and for good reason. And they head south and they begin to prepare for war. Now, a state of civil war exists from that time on between the house of Rehoboam and his son and the house of Jeroboam. They were contemporaries. And I would say probably that went on mostly along the border. And during those years, the border is shifting north and south constantly. You know, taking one, Gibeon was taken a few times, Ekron and other cities were taken, and they were constantly doing this battle against one another until it finally settled out. And we'll see that next week in the final, the major battle that put an end to it, into 2 kingdoms. And the 2 kingdoms are the kingdom of Israel to the north, which retained the name and was by far the richest, the most populous, the strongest. And the southern kingdom went by the name of Judah, from which we get the word Jews. And they gained control over the Benjamites and probably the Simeonites. Just like a look at that real quickly. You'll see here, Benjamin, unfortunately, may not have been loyal to Rehoboam, but they didn't have a whole lot of choice. They're too small. Not only that, there's a city in the territory of Benjamin that Judah wasn't going to give up. That's Jerusalem. And so Benjamin was basically kept within Jerusalem, with Judah's fold, but also Simeon. These guys down here, they just disappeared. You look them up and say, what happened to Simeon? Simeon just kind of filtered away. They migrated to the north. Some of them migrated over different places, and you just sort of lost track of them. Kind of like the Bedouin today. They live in the desert and they're nomads. So the kingdom of Judah basically kept all those tribes, and then the kingdom of Israel had all the others. Now, Jeroboam, he's the leader of the opposition, the people who eventually became that kingdom of Israel. And he's saying to himself, what am I going to do? I don't have an army. I don't have a government. I don't have anything. He needed time. He really needed time. And that's where what we saw last week, Rehoboam's got this army of 180,000. He should have attacked immediately. He could have put the rebellion down. There was no other army, nobody else to deal with. And he also had the infrastructure. He owned all the supply chain things. He owned all the command structure. He had everything on his side, and there was no reason he couldn't do this. And yet he stopped short. And that was because the prophet of the Lord said, do not attack your brothers. 12:24, 1 Kings 12, verse 24.
This is what the Lord says. Do not go up to fight against your brothers, the Israelites. Go home, every one of you, for this is my doing. So they obeyed the word of the Lord and went home again as the Lord had ordered.
It amazes me that they would have done that. How in the world could he, who cared very little for the word of the Lord, stop his effort to reclaim his kingdom when he's got an army of 180,000? They are totally disorganized. And the prophet comes in and says, don't do this because God says this is my doing. Well, the only answer I've got is the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. And we should remember that, because we see a lot of things going on with our leaders that we really hate and we really don't like. And we just need to remember the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. The heart of Putin is in the hand of the Lord, isn't it? Yeah, Len.
What's interesting about this is that Spurgeon said that very thing. He said, as crazy as this whole thing was, and it's hard to believe, yet God's hand was in everything.
That's right.
And really, you could see God's hand all the way through this. What's logical about him not going to attack them, and yet he doesn't? He backs up.
Yeah.
God's hand was on the situation.
Yeah. He said, this is my doing. And for reasons we talked about last week. But one of the big reasons was it gives Jeroboam time to prepare. Otherwise, he would have been overrun. Now, he's got to prepare for war. Now, civil war is occupying both of these kings. And so what are they going to do? Well, let's just contrast their approach. Rehoboam, now he has lost control of most of his country, and he's got to win it back. He goes ahead and he builds up 15 fortified cities. 2 Chronicles 11, 5-12, you could read it if you like, but it talks about all the cities. And they are cities down in this area, down in here, okay? Now, I think this is a rather lackluster approach to national strategy, don't you? I mean, if you're going to fortify all these cities, number one, you're working on defense, right? But wait a minute, he needs to do something offensive. He's got to get his northern tribes together, doesn't he? I don't see any effort to do that. Either he's afraid or God has just led him in the other direction, whatever. He goes and fortifies all those cities. And of course, it does him no good when Egypt comes in. Jeroboam, on the other hand, it tells us in chapter 12, verse 25, next verse over.
Then Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. From there, he went out and built up Peniel.
Okay, first thing he's got to do, he's got to get military control of his country, and he does. He goes ahead and he fortifies a major city right here in the center of his area. So he has a place from which he could operate his army when he gets one. And then another major city on the other side, because all the tribes that live east of Jordan are now loyal to him. So he's got two cities. That's a smart thing to do. But more than that, he didn't go build up 15 cities for no good reason. He focused his attention and his money on developing an army. And we will see as this conflict switches from Israel in the north being helpless before Judah in the south, the tables will be turned. And within 20 years, there will be a big battle we'll talk about next week, where Israel in the north comes after Judah with an army of 800,000, and Judah can't muster 400,000. They're outnumbered 2-1. So he invests in an army. That's an offensive strategy. And then probably the most important thing, Jeroboam is a wise man. He goes ahead and he uses a diplomatic strategy. Now, where was he in exile? He was in Egypt for a number of years, right? He was down there fostering rebellion, publishing pamphlets, sending messages up, probably sending money to the rebels up north, doing everything he could. His aim was to topple Solomon. He hated Solomon. And so he's down there in Egypt making a lot of friends. Well, now he's up here. He's succeeded in fracturing the kingdom. He's now got to establish his own. I think he calls his friends. And he tells them about all the gold and silver and the money that is in Judah. He tells them where Rehoboam is weak, where he's strong, what they can do. And he says, don't you think you'd like to help me? As a matter of fact, there was one source that I read that it specifically said when Shishak the Pharaoh came up to Judah to invade it, he was doing so in support of Jeroboam. What a great idea. Get another country to come up and help you on the opposite side. So now you got him in a big pincers movement, see? Now, Rehoboam just was not that bright. His father was smart. His father, the first thing he did is he made an alliance with Egypt so that he kept his southern flank safe. Rehoboam, what does he do? He just builds a bunch of fortified cities, puts his sons in charge of each one. A lot of good that did, because Egypt destroyed everything. So he's gone ahead and gotten Egypt to help him out. And within 5 years, Pharaoh laid waste all the cities that Rehoboam had built. He sacked the city of Jerusalem. And now Judah is reduced to tribute. There is no way Rehoboam, who has had the lions, he's had the catbird seat, he's had the power. There's no longer any way he's going to expand his kingdom. He's lucky to have what he has. He's no longer a threat. Jeroboam's done a great job at doing that. His territory was secure. But it isn't enough to militarily control your territory. You need to get control of the people. And he does that too by those same two cities. You see those cities? Shechem right here and Peniel. He didn't just choose them because they were great fortresses. They weren't. But he chose them because they were historically important. And I want you to see that. Shechem was, after Jerusalem, the most important city in Israel. I mean, it had historical significance. It was the first place that Abraham stopped when he came to Canaan originally. And he built his first altar to the Lord there, okay? It's also where Joshua led the people of Israel between the two mountains, Ebal and Gerizim. Remember that? And he read the blessings on one side and the curses on the other side at the beginning of the great conquest of the Canaanites. So that's a very important town. It was a Levitical city. And by taking over that city and moving himself in there, he basically showed his dominance over the Davidic and Mosaic priesthood. So what was he doing? Jeroboam, by picking those two cities, I should tell you about Peniel, right? Yes. Peniel was even earlier. It was the place where Jacob wrestled with God, and God gave him the name Israel. So he's laid claim to the history of his people. When you want to change a people and lead them astray or lead them in a different direction, one of the things you want to do is control their history. There's a famous picture, and this is one of scads of many. This is Joseph Stalin, okay, walking beside the Moscow Canal, and a guy by the name of I can't ever get this right, but Nikolai Yechov. That's it, Nikolai Yechov. Now, Yechov was his henchman that murdered all of his opponents through the show trials of the 30s. Have you heard of those things? He literally terrified the world by taking a third of his armed forces, all those who were, competent, and he murdered them. And the guy that he had do all that was Yechov. But Yechov fell out of favor, and Stalin decided to, pull back and to distance himself. And he had him accused of treason, and he had him executed. And from that time on, he sent his operatives into the archives, and they removed him from the pictures. Now think about that. You could do that today with Photoshop, but imagine anybody take a photographic course back, maybe, when you're in college. You had the silver nitrate and all that. Oh, it stunk to the high. I hated that. But that's not easy to do, and they did it. And they didn't just do it here. They did it in all the archives. Anybody that fell out of favor, like Trotsky, he was removed from all. You didn't see him with Lenin anywhere. And you're lucky to have both pictures in this case. Now, the Russians had an old joke. It was, they're always talking about how communism would bring in paradise on earth. And so they said, the future we know, it's the past that keeps on changing. And that's really true. The past keeps on changing. If you want to steer a people, you get control of their history. Are you seeing that anywhere? Where? Whoa, what's the glasses? All right, give me some examples.
Yeah, well,
Check around our statues. All our heroes, they're going away. What else?
We went to Plymouth Rock, and it's totally rewritten history.
Yeah.
Look to even find the Mayflower Compact, which should be the first thing you see.
That's right. Yeah. Alvin.
According to the New York paper, our problem with slavery started in 1619 or
Right.
something.
Well, the founding of the nation now is not from 1776. It's from 1619, because our nation, our wicked, evil nation, is based on slavery, and it needs to be dismembered. Right? What else?
Only
When?
that need to be dismembered. We need to pay reparations, because at least 50% of our income is based on slave labor, right?
Yep. Statutes, customs. How about Christmas? The creche when I was a kid in grammar school, I was a shepherd. I got in a lot of trouble for horsing around on the stage, but that was, we were doing the Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus thing in public school.
Here's another great one. No Democrat ever denied an election. Kind of rewritten now.
Well, sure, propaganda.
Oh, yeah.
How about language?
Gas was $5 a gallon when.
That's gaslighting. How about language?
Euphemisms.
Euphemisms? How about what are we calling abortion now? Something health?
Oh, it's reproductive health.
Reproductive health. That's right. What about pronouns? What's a woman? I'm not a biologist. I couldn't really tell you. So, yes, if you want to move a people away from where they are, from their culture, you want to make a change their history. And it isn't new. This is as old as Jeroboam. And that's exactly what he did. But he wasn't alone in that. He had to do more. If you want to control the people, you must deal with their religion. Let's read real quickly 1 Kings 12, 26 to 29.
Okay. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. One he set up in Bethel and the other in Dan. That's 29.
That's 29, you bet. Okay. Now remember, when Jeroboam was fleeing to go to Egypt, the prophet from Shiloh, the prophet Ahijah, and we haven't heard the last of him, by the way, came and told him that God would make him king and give him 10 tribes. But he also told him, and God will establish your kingdom and your dynasty as I did David, if you will obey me, if you will follow my statutes and my ordinances. And what's the standard of all these kings? Like David did. See? Well, I don't know how much stock Jeroboam really paid into that. He thought, well, this guy's maybe a kook. Thank you very much. I fully intend to do everything I can to overthrow Solomon. It's good to know that you have confidence in me. All your stuff about religious obedience and all, maybe. We'll see. Because what he did when time came to deal with this issue, he went ahead and he made religion serve politics. How do we make religion serve politics in our country? I'm sorry?
Do it now,
Okay, how?
shutting down our churches.
Okay,
Stop it coming out of the pulpit.
okay. Tyler?
Misinterpret separation of church and state.
Misinterpreting. Okay, there you go. That's one way. Chuck Colson used to like to tell a story of how they co-opted the evangelical vote. And he said, we would bring these pastors in and they had a routine they ran through, and they would run them through showing them various places, having people shake hands with them. They'd get a photo op with the president, Nixon, and then they usually would end up having lunch on the presidential yacht. And he said they were like putty in his hands because he was able to use religion to support him. Why? Because evangelicals are a large segment of the vote. And I've heard a lot of people say that Donald Trump became an earnest believer. And you saw this picture of him, on his knees, and they're laying hands on him over at Liberty. Maybe he did. I don't really know. But you sure know that it serves his political purposes. And that's just exactly what this guy does. He makes religion serve politics. And he's very smart to do that. Why? Well, because politics isn't where it all takes place. Politics is downstream of culture, and culture is downstream of religion. Politics gives us our laws regarding marriage, abortion, the courts, immigration, the rights you have, the rights you don't have. And that's usually where we get the headlines, right? This is where a lot of us are activists. We're down demonstrating against abortion, or we're trying to take over the school board, and all those things are good. I'm not saying we don't fight at the political level, but as soon as a different politician is elected to authority, that all may change. We see Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, right? Mm-hmm. Has turned around and took from Terry McAuliffe, and now he's just changing everything at the schools. He's making the parents more influential. He's doing a lot of good things from our perspective. But what happens if in a couple of years, Terry McAuliffe's elected again? It all changes. Politics isn't what does it. The difference is made in your culture, your customs, your memorials, your heroes, your language, your history, national narratives like 1619 Project, and institutions like the educational system, the media, the universities, and the courts, and the arts, certainly the arts. And one of the things that Colson used to emphasize, he said, we need Christians to infiltrate the arts and present the message of the gospel through the arts, because our culture is being lost. But our culture is being lost because our religion is being lost. See, I read to you last week, Isaiah 59, where it talked about how the Israelites had rejected God, and truth had died in the streets, and justice could not enter. And the verse, which I went back to, says, it is your sins that have come between you and your God. And that is the reason all this happened. Religion is first. Are we a Christian nation? No, well, not anymore. Well, in some ways we're not. Are we a Christian culture? But we're in flux, aren't we? We're changing. Yeah, sure. What does it mean to have a Christian culture? Well, all of our institutions, our type of government, our attitudes toward law, our customs, these things have their origin in biblical faith, much more than we realize. We are not a Christian nation in the sense that the majority of our people are believers. And does it matter if that is changing? Well, yeah, it does. Now, Viktor Orban is the Prime Minister of the nation of Hungary. He's not well liked at all by the elites in our country. I think that's one thing I like about him. He's not the pristine angel people like to paint him out to be either. But he produced in 2017 a Christmas message. I don't know who wrote it for him, but whoever did made one of the best statements I can ever think of on Christian culture. And I want to have Glenn read that for you, and you can read it up on the wall too.
When we draw the boundaries of our identity, we mark out Christian culture as the source of our pride and sustaining strength. Christianity is a culture and a civilization.
Wait, can I stop you there?
Please.
How many times have you heard Muslims say, when you're talking to Muslims, they will say, oh, the problem with you is your Christianity is a religion. Islam is an entire way of life, a way of law, an entire culture. What did he just say? It's a culture and a civilization. And it is. Go ahead.
It is within this that we live. The essence is not how many people go to church or how many pray with true devotion. Culture is a reality of everyday life, how we speak and behave towards one another, the distance we keep from one another, and how we approach one another, how we enter this world and how we leave it.
Oh, I love that. How we enter the world and how we leave it. Isn't that awesome? Now he's going to go on and he speaks of European culture. When he does, think Western, what we consider the West, and that includes us. Go ahead.
For European people, Christian culture determines the morals of our daily lives. In borderland situation, this gives us a benchmark and a compass. Amidst the contradictions of life, Christian culture shows us the way. It determines our understandings of justice and injustice, the relationship between men and women, family, success, work, and honor.
Wow. Does that not speak to you? Oh my goodness. We have a benchmark and a culture that comes from this book. It is what our civilization is based on. I recently read an interesting article in Law and Liberty, which said, we are determined to overthrow that, but we're afraid to take our weight off. It's like you got another rock in the brook that you're crossing and you're not sure whether that rock is the one. You're a little afraid of it, but you want to get off the one you're standing on. That's where we stand right now. Yeah.
You lost your screen.
You lost my screen. How'd that happen?
I do not know. I did not do it.
You did not do it. Oh, come on.
Not knowingly, yeah.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know if I can bring it back. All right, let's just take it from over here. That's fine. It may come back. I think it's just the
light's blinking, but
okay. Interesting. Wow. Well, let's not let this hurt us too much. We've got this here. Did you try hitting this up here? See if that does it. Okay, let's continue. Now, it says it gives us a benchmark and a compass. And the problem that we have today is we don't have a benchmark. We don't have a compass. It's every man for himself. I am a law to myself. If I think I'm a man, I'm a man. If I think I'm a woman, I'm a woman. If I want to do whatever I want to do, I do. If I have a goal, I can achieve it if I just believe in myself. And we could go through it on and on and on. We need a benchmark and a compass. And that compass is the law of God. And in Christian culture determines our understanding of justice. Is social justice justice? By whose authority? The relationship between men and women. Whoa, boy. Wow. Family. What's a family? Success, work, honor. Let's go on. The culture of life.
okay, our culture is the culture of life. Our starting point, the alpha and omega of our philosophy of life, is the value of life, the dignity that every person has received from God. Without this, we could not evaluate human rights and the similar modern conceptions. This is why we doubt whether we can export this into life of civilizations built on other foundations.
What basis do we have for talking about human rights? Think about that. Why do we have the notion that men should have rights? As a matter of fact, there's a great movement abroad right now to say we don't have rights. Where do we get the notion of rights? What does the Declaration of Independence tell us that our rights come from? They come from God, and therefore they cannot be taken from us legitimately, can they? We have a compass. We have a benchmark. But as we let go of that religious compass and benchmark, we are losing human rights. I want to ask you a question. To restore the culture, we need, well, before I say that, let me ask you a question. Are all religions compatible?
No.
Oh, you see, we make a big thing about religious freedom, but there is a problem with religious freedom, isn't there? When religious freedom was talked about in the founding of our country, the country was by and large committed to a biblical worldview. People everywhere saw that, well, the Presbyterians may be the frozen chosen, and we're the Assembly of God, and we're leaping the pews and having a great time, but we all have the same basic outlook. We are all biblical people. And so there's a commonality. So freedom of religion can work in that concept. But what if you have an Islamic component that wants freedom to run by Sharia law, which we see now in England? There are sections of England that are run by Sharia law. So France is in the same situation. And so that means an honor killing is okay. As a father, if I think my daughter dishonors my family, I can kill her, sometimes brutally, and nobody can touch me. In our side of the game, we say that's wrong. She has as much right to life as I do. How do we resolve that? You see? So the change in religion can tear a country apart. And really, to restore the country, we must restore our historic Christian religion. We need another great awakening. We desperately need it. And if you're not praying for a revival, okay. If you're not praying for a revival in the church and an awakening in the country, we're courting disaster. We got to do all we can to make that happen. Okay, controlling the people, you control their religion. To make his throne secure, David goes ahead, or Jeroboam goes ahead, and he establishes these two idols to replace the worship of Jehovah. Why? Why is it that tyrants of all ages oppose the Christian church more than any other, and they undermine the family? What is the problem?
They're gonna take over.
Fearing that Christians are going to take over? Well, maybe. Yeah. What's the tyrant's point of view?
Never mind.
No, go ahead. What were we going to say?
I was gonna say, ultimately, they fear the truth and what that will expose.
All right. If you're the truth, it will expose that they're wicked people, right? Yeah, that's true. Tony.
Their allegiance, they want your allegiance to themselves, not to another.
Exactly.
They have God as king. They've got it.
Yeah. The greatest threat to a despot is any source of authority recognized by the people and not subordinate to him. Is God your authority? To the rack, you see. There will come a time when you have to say no. What did Paul and Peter and John say to the Sanhedrin? He said, well, whether it makes sense to you to obey you or to obey God, we know that we simply must obey God. And so they drew the line. They said, we're not obeying you because God has commanded us to do this. Now, it's much more subtle than we would think. Okay, it didn't happen overnight. And to get a sense of that subtlety, I want you to hear what Josephus has to say. Josephus was a first century historian who wrote a lot about the history of the Jews, and he's really a good source to read. I want you to read. We got two screens here. He's going to read about this religious change in his own words. Glenn?
Okay. Strain your eyes for the TV because I'll read through this.
Yeah.
He made
Sorry.
2 golden heifers and built little temples for them, the one in the city of Bethel and the other in Dan. And when he'd called those 10 tribes together over whom he ruled, he made a speech to the people in these words. I suppose, my countrymen, that you know this, that every place hath God in it, nor is there any one determinate place in which he is, but he is everywhere and hears and sees those that worship him. On which account, I do not think it right for you to go so long a journey to Jerusalem, which is an enemy's city, to worship him. It was a man that built the temple.
Okay. Last ditch effort. Okay. Oh, almost there. There we go.
Hey.
Okay. I tell you, you got to appreciate these guys over here. This technical stuff is not simple. It's a job. Okay, so we can continue here. So we get an idea of how subtly he did it. Notice that he sets up 2 shrines in Dan way up to the north and Bethel way down to the south. Now, why are those important? Well, Dan is probably the place where Abraham first entered the land of the Canaanites. That's where Abraham came from, up in Haran, and he comes down. But Bethel is even better because that's where Abraham built his second altar in Canaan. It's where he returned to call on the Lord after he'd been in Egypt. And that's where Jacob dreamed. And Jacob, remember, he saw the ladder to heaven and he gave it the name Bethel, which is the gate of heaven or the gates of God. Samuel held his court there. So he's very subtle about this. And he leads the people to do that, to worship at these two shrines. And the reason is pretty clear, because what does the law of Moses say about 3 feasts a year? You had to go where? Jerusalem.
Every man had to go.
That's right.
As long as they did, he said he would protect the nation from incursion from without.
Okay, so you've got this whole, all these tribes, a very substantial number of them still see themselves as servants of Jehovah, right? Of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they believe the law of Moses is the law. And so they would come down to Jerusalem, and what would that do? That would really undermine his authority. And he needed to find a way to do that. Now, he plays on a couple of things. He says, well, every place has God in it, doesn't it? God's everywhere. No, that's true, right? Therefore, I can worship him anywhere. The great theologian Trace Atkins sings, I'd rather be on the lake with my mind on God than in church with my mind on fishing. Heard that argument before? Sure you have. I can worship God on the ski slopes. I'm not really serious. But it's enticing. That I can go fishing and call it Sunday school. That's great, you know. That's the sin of Cain. The sin of Cain is coming to God on my own terms. God had said, you will bring an innocent substitute to shed its blood to cover your sin. And he said, I'm a farmer. I'll bring some radishes. I'll do my thing, my good works. It's the lure of convenience. And that lure of convenience we need to be careful about. Isaiah castigates the people about their breaking the Sabbath and not reserving a day that's special for God. He says, you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and doing as you please on my holy day. And I don't want to spend a lot of time there because we may well be convicted. That's meddling. If I've got something better going, I don't need to be in church. You know, we're not to judge one another. I know we're not under the law in that way, but it's a principle and we ought to be careful. I think that the Lord's day needs to be some day where we do give way in our own preferences to what he might want. And I want to show you 3 steps to national apostasy here. Let's read Josephus to finish him out.
I have also made 2 golden heifers dedicated to the same God, and one of them I have consecrated in the city of Bethel, and the other in Dan, to the end that those of you that dwell nearest these cities, you may go to them and worship God there. And I will ordain for you certain priests and Levites from among yourselves, that you may have no want of the tribe of Levi or the sons of Aaron. But let him that is desirous among you of being a priest bring to God a bullock and a ram, in which they say, Aaron the first priest brought also.
I want to give you 3 steps that he uses to lead a nation away from God and apostasy. First of all, you counterfeit the truth. Notice he says, these 2 great heifers, these shrines are dedicated to the same God, right? In fact, he says, these are your gods, O Israel, that brought you out of Egypt. Go look at Exodus 32:4, and Aaron, who has been minding the store while Moses is on Mount Sinai, builds a calf out of gold. And that's exactly what he says. These are your gods, O Israel, that brought you up out of Egypt. And then he organizes a feast to who? To Jehovah, the God who brought them out of Israel. But Jehovah is now identified with this calf. And that's exactly what Jeroboam does. Secondly, corrupt the clergy. You can read it in 1 Kings 12, 31 to 33. He basically puts the priesthood in the office of Levite up for sale. Anybody wants to be a priest or Levite, come to me, give me some money. Okay, matter of fact, you could actually do it just like Aaron did. Aaron, he made a bullock offering, and you could do the same thing. No mention of Moses' law, no mention of what God has required. Corrupt the clergy. You got to read Eric Metaxas's book, Bonhoeffer, because Dietrich Bonhoeffer explained how the Nazis corrupted the German church. And they claimed to be the true German church. And what they did was they made all the pastors' offices sinecures of the government, so that your salary comes from who? The Fuhrer, right? And if you didn't toe the line on the Jews, and if you didn't preach against the Jews the way the government was, you lost your job. And then you find somebody who's willing to do it, and you placed him in that place. John.
The government also said that, no one's really tithing to the church. So what we'll do is we'll tax them for you and give you the money directly.
That's right.
That law is still on the books.
It's still on the books. When I lived in Germany, you paid the church tax. All you had to do is decide whether you were Lutheran or Catholic, and it would go to that place, okay?
Isn't that where the free church came from?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that the taxist said Bonhoeffer saw here in America, though, was a weak church in America. Now, we're talking about back in the 30s, and the only place that, and 40s, the only place he found truth being preached, interestingly enough, was in the black churches.
In Harlem, yeah.
Which is very interesting. But I have a question, because God wanted both of these kings to be obedient to him. Okay, and neither of them were. Jeroboam knew, he had to know, that there were pilgrimage feasts in Jerusalem, and the only place that he could offer sacrifice legitimately was at the temple. So my other question is, and this is a question I legitimately have, what happens if Jeroboam's people say, we're going to the temple, we're going to offer sacrifice, we're compelled to do that?
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're going to talk about that. Look at 2 Chronicles 11, 13 to 14.
The priest,
Now, in addition to corrupting the clergy and creating a fake clergy, he went ahead and he persecuted the genuine priests and Levites. And look what happened.
there you go.
Go ahead.
The priests and Levites from all their districts throughout Israel sided with him. The Levites even abandoned their pasture lands and property and came to Judah and Jerusalem because Jeroboam and his sons had rejected them as priests of the Lord.
Okay. Jeroboam and his crew had rejected the real priests and persecuted them. And they were so persecuted, they had to leave. And that's what they did. They left their homes, their farms, all their possessions, and they had to flee and live in the south if they wanted to serve the Lord. And then it says, my third point is you discomfit the righteous and you make them vote with their feet. And I think this is what you're getting at in 2 Chronicles 11, 16 to 17. Go ahead.
Those from every tribe of Israel who set their hearts on seeking the Lord, the God of Israel, followed the Levites to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. Sorry about that. I lost my place. For the Lord, of their God, of their fathers. They strengthened the kingdom of Judah and supported Rehoboam, son of Solomon, 3 years, walking in the ways of David and Solomon during this time.
So the people actually left. And what happens is there's coming a sort. Anybody heard about the great sort in America? It's mostly considered political, but there's a religious side to that. Your red states are becoming more red. Your blue states are becoming more blue. If you live in a blue state and you're a Christian and you have values and a worldview that grow out of that Christianity, the odds of you moving to Florida or Texas are pretty good. And if you're in Florida and Texas and you don't like all that and you want the LGBTQ agenda to be highlighted, the climate change thing and all the other stuff, and you really have rejected a Christian worldview and adopted this self-centered autonomous worldview, you might want to go back to a blue. And that's exactly what's happening. And I think that's what happened in their day. And the day may well come when you and I feel we need to pull up stakes and move. And it's going to be a big deal when that happens. Okay, I want to finish on a couple of things. First of all, have we become a post-Christian nation? I would say we are becoming, but it started a very long time ago. And I want to give you 4 of our Jeroboams. And I want to say that as a post-Christian nation, we are now more open to tyranny. We've seen a war begin on the church and on the family. And these are 2 Jeroboams that took the most fundamental aspect of a nation's religion and culture and undermined it. Number 1, you change the concept of the people and their relationship to God's word. Now, Julius Wellhausen is well known. He lived back in the 1870s, or he wrote back in the 1880s. He published the idea of what we call the documentary hypothesis. And this is a lot of high-sounding academic jargon that uses the use of the different words by authors to prove that there are different authors. Basically, what they say is, since there can be no miracles, we know that to be true, those are all legendary, therefore, Moses could not have written about the Red Sea. That must have come much, much, much later as the story got embellished and turned into a legend. Wait a minute. I don't know if that's true. But they just stated it. And then they said, because we know that God doesn't give men a sense of what's going to happen in the future, and prophecy doesn't really predict anything, then Daniel could not possibly have written Daniel. So who wrote it? Well, it must have been people back around 1000 AD. And what he did was he gave academic credence, because of his credentials, to scoffing and blowing away men's faith in the accuracy and the truth of God's word. That's one. The second thing you do is you undermine the notion of creation. The most fundamental way that God has revealed himself to us is in the creation. And you cannot get away from the fact that when you look at all the incredible complexity and the order and the beauty of the creation, even a fallen creation, that there's got to be intelligence behind it. And Charles Darwin, of course, he's the guy at the tip of the spear, but way before him it started, published in 1848, The Origin of Species, and said, well, we think that the world is billions of years old and that all these things happened by chance, acted on by natural selection. Now, the more scientific evidence we get as we observe things in science, the harder that has come to be held. I mean, there's even right now a big debate over, is evolution, the way we understand it, still a decent way of explaining the past? I mean, the fossil record doesn't agree with it, no matter how many fossils we get out there, right? And the genetics, the science of genetics is getting to the point where it's proving that you just can't get there from here. And many of these things are showing that the earth must be much younger. And I know, Karen, you got something to say. We're running out of time.
Of creation, we are without excuse. And so we've got to get rid of creation.
That's right. Both of these men were looking for a rationale that would allow men to escape their accountability to God.
Mhm.
That is where it is. It is an answer looking for a reason. And we need to remember that they were a priori anti-supernaturalists from the start. They were a conclusion that was looking for some backup. Okay? Now, two more. How do these ideas, which might have floated around in the rarefied atmosphere of academia, how did they come to be commonly accepted in what one author calls, Carl Trueman calls, the social imaginary, the way we see the world? Well, it was done through the educational system. There are two or more, Horace Mann and John Dewey. Horace Mann was the one that pushed like an evangelist for universal government funded non-sectarian education. And then Dewey, his self-proclaimed mission in education was to separate children from the religious superstitions of their parents. Once again, it's an outcome looking for a reason. Now, here is the front page. Somebody gave me this years ago. The front page of the paper during the Scopes trial, which everybody thinks is about evolution, but it isn't. But I want you to notice how jarring this is. Do you notice? The title speaks of truth. Wow, we don't believe in that anymore. And then the Bible verse is in the masthead. It says, wherefore I will not be negligent to put you always in remembrance of these things, though you know them, and be established in the present truth. Wow. The thing that really knocks you is it's in Washington, D.C. Wow. 1925, I think. Yeah. You find that jarring? It looks preposterous to our mind. The Scopes trial was not about the teaching of evolution. As a matter of fact, Clarence Darrow conceded the trial, and Williams Jennings Bryan won it. It was about the right of parents to decide what was being taught as truth to their children, and the parents lost. We have Jill Biden recently saying that the parents should have no right to determine what books should be put into the schools. We have recently banned Books Week, which identifies people like us who want control of our children's education with Hitler's burning books. Now, Elijah was told in his day, and we're going to get to him, that he thought he was all alone. And he said, there are 7,000 that have not bent the knee to Baal. How can we ensure that our kids or our grandkids are among them? I'm going to give you two things real quick. First of all, refute the scientism of our day and its offspring, evolution. That is not that hard, and it's getting easier every day. Evolution is not science. Evolution is philosophy that seeks to explain the facts of science with a story that is just so. And I think Genesis is a far better story, far better supported. And your kids don't need to become apologists. They don't need to become debaters. They need to have been exposed to the arguments that are convincing, that make it clear what evolution is. It is the mortal enemy of God's people. And secondly, educate them in the Word of God. Make it central to your family's life. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 is the famous Shema of Israel. Let me read it to you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul and your strength. These commandments, this would be the law, I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands, bind them about your foreheads, write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Your life should revolve around the Word of God. It needs to be central. We're sending our kids off to college without enough of a knowledge of the Word of God that they don't have something firm to stand on because there's nothing left. So we need to give them the rock of ages that they can stand on. Let me finish up real quick here. Would you please? All right. God's response to this, we don't have time to talk about. It's given to you in chapter 13. And what he does is God sends a prophet from Judah because there isn't any in Israel, okay? And he comes up when Jeroboam is offering a sacrifice and he pronounces this huge curse. And he said, this curse will happen in the future, but to show you that it will happen in the future, the altar is going to disintegrate. And that's what happens. The altar falls apart and the ashes fall down. Another thing is the king is standing there and he says, seize him. And when he does that, his arm shrivels up and he can't get it back. And then he begs the prophet, pray to God to give me back my arm. And God does. 340 years later, the prophecy is fulfilled by Josiah. And I would love to go into that, but we're not going to. Read it yourself. But everywhere from this point on, when a king is mentioned and he's evaluated, every king in this list here, okay, it says he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the ways of Jeroboam and committing the same sin that Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. Look, God's only condition that is for his people to enjoy his protection and his blessing is that we walk in his ways and we keep his commands. It's that simple. And when we don't, we bring trouble, just like Rehoboam, a destruction upon ourselves and the generations after us. What will be in store for the nation, the church, the family that turns away from the Lord? Nothing good. What will be the legacy of our fathers that will be borne by generations to come? Well, will the sins of the fathers be visited upon the children to the third and fourth generation? The sins of Jeroboam were visited on his nation for 150 years. Or will God, Deuteronomy 7:8, will God keep his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments? We need an awakening in our nation that we might love him and keep his commandments. We need awakenings in our hearts and in our families, that we love him, we keep his commandments if we expect his blessing.